Um, Huge topic around sports, especially in the NBA, is about ring culture. Thought we'd have a decent talk about that. LeBron, it all sprung up because of LeBron. He recently criticized the NBA's ring culture on the Mind the Game podcast, arguing that a player's individual greatness shouldn't be solely defined by the number of championships they win, believing that the obsession with rings as the ultimate measure of success overlooks other significant contributions and accomplishments that players have. He's quoted as saying, I don't know why it's discussed so much in our sport and why it's the end all be all of everything. As he spoke to Steve Nash on the Mind the Game podcast, he listed off players like Allen Iverson, Charles Barkley, and even Steve Nash, who he was talking to, who, despite not winning championships, are all still considered legends and had a major impact on the game, which I agree with. Um, for me, I may be different from most people, but when comparing players as if to rank them all time, I myself personally, I don't really look at championships. Um, you know me, growing up, I was always making lists, right? In my notebook, it was just constantly ranking players and teams and just being a nerd about sports. Anytime I would be looking at a player's, you know, basketball reference page, baseball reference page, I wasn't really looking at championships. And that just may be the basketball or baseball background in me, where stats are pretty much everything. And you can never look at a player like Mike Trout and think he's not one of the greatest players of all time, even though he's never won a playoff series. In basketball, I'm looking at per game stats, all NBA selections, all-star selections, MVPs, scoring, rebound, assist titles. How many years was your peak? Uh, for me, I mean, name the two athletes in major American sports in the last 50 years who have 7 rings. Can you name the two?
Robert Horry.
You hit the punchline, definitely, but Tom Brady and Robert Horry. And is Robert Horry the best NBA player in the last 50 years? No. Now, if you there was a great discussion on First Take about this when they were at the NBA draft, and it was Stephen A. They brought on T Mac, Tracy McGrady, Gilbert Arenas, and Jay Williams. And Gilbert Arenas made a great point that around 2003, there was an argument between Kobe and T Mac on who was the better player. 2003, Kobe had 3 rings. T Mac had none, and T Mac would never have one.
He would
So
never win a playoff series.
exactly, and obviously injuries played a big part of his latter years when he got to the Houston Rockets. But right around that time, he was with the Orlando Magic, and there was an argument between who was better, and a lot of that had to do with stats and All-Star selections and All NBA. And a lot of obviously those 3 rings that Kobe got were with Shaq, and Shaq was the guy. And it wasn't until Kobe got his 2 later with Pau Gasol and that crew that we started to talk about his, all-time ranking compared to Jordan. So which side are you on with this? Do you look at championships as a prerequisite to being an all-time great?
It's a contributor for sure. However, there are kind of exceptions though. If you are a playoff riser though, or just you just don't fall off in the playoffs, like you're a productive regular season player, still a productive playoff performer, and but you just don't win that many rings. Like that's why. I mean, this is all pointing at the Jordan versus LeBron GOAT debate,
Yeah.
and anyone who just says the rings is the deciding factor. I mean, it's just lunacy. I mean, LeBron doesn't, other than the Maverick series, the Heat Maverick series. I mean, yes, LeBron would play terrible that series, but I mean, LeBron just like carried teams to the finals, and he would perform.
07.
07. You could argue like the 2015 because Kyrie and Love were both out, and 2018 whenever it was that famous promotional pick for the finals with KD, Steph, and Clay, and then LeBron, Tristan Thompson, and Kyle Korver on the poster. So, but you look at LeBron's stats. I mean, he put up that 50-point game in the finals. I mean, he still played exceptionally well. You, I mean, you got to look at like LeBron owning. I'm not saying who the goat is right now. I'm just saying like why the rings thing isn't shouldn't be the deciding factor. I mean, LeBron owned 14 other teams in his conference for an entire decade. I mean, he made how many? He made 8 or 9 straight NBA finals
Yeah, he
out of the
basically owned
East.
the whole 2010s decade.
And like people claim, oh, it's because the East was so bad. Well, that kind of happened. Look at Brady. I mean, Brady was the reason the AFC East was always so. When Brady won the AFC East all those years, all those teams were bad. That's because they were all risking and trying to do something to beat this guy, but they just kept on failing and failing. I mean, it was all geared toward beating this guy. That's kind of how the East was. So it's yeah, sure, it was weak, but it's kind of because of LeBron's greatness. That's kind of how. I mean, that's honestly how Jordan was too. I mean, like uh, teams did whatever they could to try to beat him, but I mean, Jordan was just too good. But I mean, and you could argue going back to the owning the East for 8 or 9 years, like it's a you could argue that Jordan could have done that if he hadn't retired due to gambling. But uh, and I could easily see him doing that. So and then Jordan would obviously get the edge. But yeah, there's just so many other things to look at. But I do think playoff faller that easily goes against players. Obviously, in baseball, it's different because if you have a small sample size like Mike Trout, that's different. But like basketball, like James Harden's a perfect example. You look at his regular season numbers, you could argue he's one of the greatest of all time. You look at then you look at his playoff drop off, and yeah, and honestly, Tracy McGrady too. I mean, yeah, injuries played a part in it, but when you never win a playoff series, that that is held against you because I don't care. Championships are so many things have to go right for you to win a title. If you never won a playoff series, that is a red flag. I don't.
But isn't that more on the front office on
I
roster
mean,
building?
that's a part of it, yes, because basketball's a team game, obviously. But rings are a contributor. I will say that. I think rings are more of a contributor than you were giving it credit for. But it's not the end all be all by any means. Else, Bill Russell's the goat. Robert Horry's better than Jordan and LeBron. Uh, Kareem, Kareem and Magic and all those Lakers guys are better than LeBron. And yeah, you just don't see many people making that case. So um, yeah, you could have the debate: is like 4 and 6 better or worse than 6 and 0? That's the ring debate. But I mean, you got to look at stats too, like longevity. That's
Yeah,
like you were saying.
yeah, and I know people make a big deal about a weak Eastern Conference during LeBron's tenure, but look at some of the teams that he played against. Derrick Rose, prime Derrick Rose with the Chicago Bulls, and that team that had Joakim Noah, Carlos Boozer, and they added Jimmy Butler towards the end of that stint with Rose. But he was an unstoppable force, and you know they at one point, C.J. Watson was interviewed. He was a former guard in the league that said that players would pretend to be sick to play, so they wouldn't have to, go up against prime D Rose. So that's one. You had the Indiana Pacers during the Paul George era when they were looked at as maybe possibly one of the greatest defenses of all time, and that's the type of a team that LeBron had to face in the Eastern Conference Finals for 2 or 3 straight years. And you're talking about a couple teams in the Atlanta Hawks, the Boston Celtics, who at different times had 4 All-Stars make it the same year. I mean, Boston had Rondo and Pierce and Garnett and Allen. So I think sometimes the East is looked at as really weak during LeBron's tenure because LeBron dominated the East, and I think that kind of shows how great he was during that time. When I compared, the Kobe and T-Mac, how about one that was more our era when we watched LeBron and KD. There was an argument that KD could be the best player in the league at one point. There was that argument. That has done past, and LeBron was basically crowned. But for the reason that he has more rings than KD is a lot of what that had to do with, that argument, and KD obviously joining Golden State to get his. So there's also the argument of some rings aren't created equal, right? Obviously, we mentioned Robert Horry before, and then obviously LeBron playing in the era that he did compared to the teams that Michael Jordan played against, and also the style of play in the 90s compared to the 2010s, where zone defense was banned during the time when Michael Jordan was playing. So it was straight up man for pretty much his whole career. And Jordan's even quoted as saying that if there was zone, he might have not have had as much success as he did during that stretch in the 90s. So I think it is hard to compare players anyway, basically, because when you group an all-time list together, you've got guards, wings, and centers. So that's like off the jump, you're comparing different roles within a team. So if you just took one position, let's take power forwards, and after Tim Duncan, arguably the next two greatest power forwards are Karl Malone and Charles Barkley, and neither have a ring. So like there's definitely like great players who never won rings, and you find them all the time on all-time lists. Really
Dan Marino for football.
Right.
Like that.
Exactly. So the main issue really with evaluating players based off rings is that not everybody gets put in the same situation when they're drafted. And even when you're comparing players who have rings, not all championships are created equal. Some guys like Magic, they get placed alongside the greatest center in the game at that point in a well-built roster, and obviously he wins a championship his rookie year. Others like LeBron, you can even throw MJ into the mix, get put into a dysfunctional organization with a less than mediocre roster, and are asked to basically pull them out of lottery purgatory. So how do we evaluate a championship ring that Jordan got with a team that he was drafted on only after Scottie Pippen grew into himself and they hired Phil Jackson to be head coach, and compare it to players like LeBron or KD who jumped ship to chase titles on more established teams? So that's it. It's so hard.
Was it Arenas or someone else who said something about how no one respects rings like if you were a side piece?
Right. I think that was during like the Kobe discussion
Yeah,
of him being with Shaq.
which is why that Tracy McGrady versus Kobe discussion happened. But I mean that's true, and fans of some established players try to forget that, like people claiming like Kobe's the greatest of all time. They point to the 5 is better than 4. Look at LeBron. Well,
Right.
if you watched any of, I mean, yeah, Kobe wasn't. Kobe was good, but he wasn't the best player on those 3 rings because the great Shaquille O'Neal was. Um, Same with Curry. Curry's a top 10 player of all time, but his hardcore fan base is kind of written off. Like they're almost pretending like Durant didn't even exist
Right.
when they're talking. Whenever, I mean, he was a two-time Finals MVP and was definitely their best player for those 2 rings. So, I think that's a rule that needs to be established more by people when discussing like where do guys rank. Like if you're going to say rings, yeah, obviously this Jordan and LeBron are above everyone else when it comes to this conversation because
And
those two are the best players in all their rings. But
right.
then you look at the next tier of guys like your Kobe's, your Curry's. I'll even say Kareem because later in his career you could say Magic was their best player, and Magic, frankly, because then for earlier part of his career, Kareem was the best player. I mean, this is a conversation that could go on for hours, especially if you involve more people in it, and especially if you got people with different perspectives and just had this long conversation. Yeah, it could go on for hours. Probably fist fights might get involved too, but
Why is it so prevalent in the NBA? Why in the sport of basketball is this rings seem to be hold a lot more importance because we group Tom Brady and Peyton Manning in the same that we look at them on the same tier as equals, and Brady's got 5 more championships than Manning does. I mean, a lot of this is self-induced by LeBron because he basically brought this on himself by chasing rings and trying to chase Jordan. I mean, it was well documented. Like this was what a lot of this was about, and now he's the one complaining about it, though.
Oh, the answer is because the game's evolved, and then almost all sports evolve. But for some reason, in basketball, the older fans can't accept the game's evolved, and they claim pure nostalgia for like it's who they watch. They watched Jordan growing up. They saw Jordan dominate the league, so and then they can't stand any like they can't accept like the game's changed, and that also makes like our generation who didn't watch Jordan, that makes us discredit him, even though we never really watched him. Like we've just been watching the current NBA. Uh, it's all big like, and then you see guys like Shaq and Charles on inside the NBA just diss on today's NBA and like,
Mm.
oh, like guys wouldn't survive, and I mean that's bad for basketball in my opinion. But that's a different conversation. But yeah, it's all about the fan base. Like you don't see any older fans claiming that Montana is better than Brady anymore. Yeah, you don't. But NBA, like you don't see any. There's a few maybe, but hardly any like guys who watched a lot of 80s, 90s basketball claim that LeBron's the best because that's just not their era. So yeah, it's just been something strange about basketball. How and I mean the game definitely has changed a lot. So I understand why like older fans don't appreciate or don't enjoy today's game as much because it's not what they used to watch.